Welcome to Quick Speak the English podcast that helps you learn English quickly and easily. In this episode, we're going to explore the topic of loneliness. It's something that many people experience, but it's not always easy to talk about.
That's right. Loneliness is a very common human experience, but it can feel very isolating.
Yeah, it's interesting because, we live in a world where we're constantly connected, through technology, but yet so many people still feel lonely. What are your thoughts on this paradox?
It's true, we have more ways to connect than ever before, but the quality of those connections is important. Sometimes online interactions can feel superficial and don't really fulfill our deeper need for meaningful connection.
So it's not just about the quantity of connections, but the quality.
Exactly. And it's also important to recognize that loneliness isn't just, a single feeling. There are different types of loneliness, each with its own unique characteristics.
Oh, can you tell us more about these different types of loneliness?
Certainly one type is situational loneliness, which is often triggered by, a major life change, like moving to a new city or starting a new job or ending a relationship. These transitions can disrupt our social networks and leave us feeling disconnected.
Yeah, those are definitely times when people might feel more isolated. What are some other types of loneliness?
Another type is emotional loneliness, which can occur even when you're surrounded by people. This type of loneliness stems from a lack of, deep, intimate connections. You might feel like you don't have anyone to truly confide in or share your deepest thoughts and feelings with.
Yeah, that feeling of being alone in a crowd can be really tough.
Absolutely. And then there's chronic loneliness, which is a more persistent and severe form of loneliness that lasts for 2 years or more. Chronic loneliness can have serious consequences for our mental and physical health.
That sounds quite worrying. Is there any research to support the idea that chronic loneliness can impact our health?
Studies have shown that chronic loneliness is associated with an increased risk of various health problems, including heart disease, depression, and even dementia. It's as harmful to our health as smoking or obesity.
Wow, that's a powerful statement. It really highlights how important human connection is for our well-being. So what exactly is happening in our brains when we experience loneliness?
Loneliness impacts our brains in a number of ways. For example, it can trigger a heightened sense of vigilance towards social threats. This means we're more likely to perceive rejection or negative judgment from others, even when it's not actually present.
So it's like our brains are on high alert, constantly scanning for potential social dangers.
That's a good way to put it, and this hypervigilance can make it even harder to reach out and connect with others because we're anticipating rejection.
It becomes a vicious cycle. Loneliness makes us more sensitive to rejection, which then makes it harder to connect with others, leading to even more loneliness.
Exactly, and to make matters worse, loneliness also dampens the activity of our brain's reward system, making it harder to experience pleasure from things that normally bring us joy.
So things that we used to enjoy might feel less satisfying or rewarding when we're feeling lonely.
Precisely. And as if that wasn't enough, loneliness also triggers the release of cortisol, the stress hormone. This can lead to a chronic state of stress and anxiety, which can further impact our physical and mental health.
It sounds like loneliness really takes a toll on us, both physically and emotionally. Knowing all of this, it's clear that addressing loneliness is crucial. Where do we even begin to tackle this complex issue?
The first step is recognizing that loneliness is a common human experience and that it's okay to reach out for help and support. It's not a sign of weakness, but rather a signal that we need to prioritize our social connections.
That's an important message. It's easy to feel ashamed or embarrassed about feeling lonely. But it's important to remember that we're not alone in this experience. What are some practical steps we can take to start addressing loneliness and building more meaningful connections?
We can start by focusing on what we call emotional first aid. It's about taking care of our emotional well-being and building a strong foundation from which we can start reaching out and making connections.
That makes sense. It's hard to connect with others if we're not feeling good about ourselves. What are some of the key elements of this emotional first aid approach?
One important element is reframing our negative thoughts. When we're feeling lonely, it's easy to fall into patterns of negative thinking. We might start to believe that we're unlovable, unworthy of connection, or destined to be alone.
Yeah, those thoughts can be really debilitating and make it even harder to reach out to others.
Exactly. So it's crucial to challenge those negative thoughts and replace them with more positive and empowering ones. For instance, instead of thinking I'm unlovable, we can try to reframe that thought as I'm worthy of connection and I'm going to find ways to build those connections.
So it's about shifting our mindset from self-criticism to a more proactive and hopeful outlook.
That's right. And in addition to reframing our thoughts, it's also important to practice self-compassion. We need to be kind to ourselves and recognize that everyone feels lonely sometimes. It's a normal human emotion, and it doesn't diminish our worth or value.
Self-compassion is so important, especially when we're struggling. It allows us to approach our challenges with more gentleness and understanding. So we've talked about reframing negative thoughts and practicing self-compassion. What are some other practical things we can do as part of this emotional first aid process?
Another important aspect of emotional first aid is rebuilding our foundation. This means taking care of our physical and mental health to boost our mood and reduce anxiety.
That makes sense. When we're feeling physically and mentally well, we're better equipped to handle the challenges of life, including loneliness. What are some practical tips for rebuilding our foundation?
One simple but powerful thing is to make sure we're getting enough sunlight. Spending just 15 minutes outdoors in the morning can help increase serotonin levels, which can improve our mood and reduce anxiety.
So soaking up some sunshine is a good starting point.
Absolutely. Another helpful strategy is using a weighted blanket. The gentle pressure from a weighted blanket can have a calming effect and help reduce anxiety. Some studies have shown that using a weighted blanket can reduce anxiety by as much as 63%.
That's fascinating. It sounds like a simple and accessible way to create a sense of comfort and security.
Exactly. It's about incorporating small changes into our daily routines that can have a big impact on our overall well-being.
These are all great tips for taking care of ourselves emotionally and physically. But how do we move from feeling better within ourselves to actually connecting with other people?
That's where the next phase comes in, strategic reconnection. We'll dive into that after a short break. Stay tuned.
We were just talking about emotional first aid as a way to start addressing loneliness. Now, I'm curious to hear more about this strategic reconnection you mentioned. What does that involve?
Strategic reconnection is all about, taking intentional steps to rebuild our social connections. It's about moving from self-care to actively engaging with others.
That sounds like a crucial step in overcoming loneliness. What are some of the strategies involved in this strategic reconnection process?
One effective approach is what we call social microdosing. This involves, intentionally creating small opportunities for connection in our daily lives.
Social microdosing. That's an interesting term. Could you elaborate on what that looks like in practice?
Imagine you're gradually reintroducing yourself to social situations after a period of isolation. You wouldn't jump into a large gathering right away. Instead, you might start with smaller, more manageable interactions.
So it's about easing back into social interactions at a comfortable pace.
Exactly. It's about finding those low-pressure opportunities to connect with others, even in small ways. For example, you could strike up a conversation with the cashier at the grocery store, or say hello to a neighbor, or compliment someone on their outfit.
Those are great examples. They seem simple, but I can see how they could start to build momentum and make us feel more comfortable interacting with others.
Absolutely. It's about shifting our mindset from avoiding social interactions to actively seeking them out, even in small doses.
So we've dipped our toes back into the social pool with social microdosing. What's the next step in the strategic reconnection process?
Once we've started to feel more comfortable with those smaller interactions, we can start to think about building deeper and more meaningful connections. This is where the 3D connection framework comes in.
3D connection framework. I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
This framework focuses on 3 key dimensions of connection: depth, diversity, and duration.
Let's break those down, starting with depth.
Yeah.
What does it mean to cultivate depth in our relationships?
Depth is about moving beyond superficial conversations and sharing more personal thoughts, feelings, and experiences. It's about allowing ourselves to be vulnerable with others and creating a space for genuine connection.
That can be challenging for some people, especially if they've been hurt or disappointed in past relationships. Do you have any suggestions for how to start deepening those connections?
One helpful strategy is to use questions that encourage deeper conversation. Instead of sticking to small talk, try asking open-ended questions that invite others to share more about themselves. For example, you could ask, "What are you passionate about?" Or, "What's something you're learning right now?"
Those are great conversation starters. They encourage people to go beyond surface-level topics and share something more meaningful.
Exactly. And as you get to know someone better, you can gradually start to ask more personal questions like, "What's something you're proud of?" Or, "What's a challenge you've overcome that's made you stronger?"
It's about building trust and intimacy over time.
Precisely. Now moving on to the second dimension of the 3D connection framework, diversity. What does diversity mean in the context of relationships?
I'm guessing it's not just about having a lot of friends, but having different types of relationships that fulfill different needs in our lives.
That's exactly right. It's about recognizing that we need a variety of connections to thrive. It's helpful to think about it in terms of a support web with different people playing different roles.
I like that analogy. Could you elaborate on the different types of relationships that might make up our support web?
One important role is that of a companion. This is someone you enjoy spending time with, someone who shares your interests and makes life more fun. It could be a friend you go to the movies with, a teammate you play sports with, or a colleague you grab coffee with.
So someone who brings joy and lightness into our lives.
Exactly. Then there's the role of a mentor. This is someone who offers guidance, support, and inspiration, perhaps in your career or personal development. It could be a teacher, a coach, an older sibling, or a respected colleague.
Someone who helps us grow and learn.
Yes. Next, we have the role of a confidant. This is someone you trust deeply, someone you can share your innermost thoughts and feelings with without fear of judgment. It could be a close friend, a family member, or a therapist.
That sounds like a crucial role, having someone who truly listens and understands.
It is. We also need people who energize us. These are the friends who bring excitement and adventure into our lives, who challenge us to step outside our comfort zones and try new things.
The friends who make us laugh and help us create memories.
Exactly. And finally, we have the role of an anchor. This is someone who provides stability, unconditional love, and a sense of belonging. It's often a family member or a very close friend who's been there for us through thick and thin.
Someone who makes us feel safe and supported no matter what.
Precisely, having a balance of these different types of relationships in our lives creates a strong and resilient support web.
It's about recognizing that different relationships serve different purposes and that we need a variety of connections to truly thrive.
That's right. Now let's move on to the final dimension of the 3D connection framework: duration. What does it mean to cultivate duration in our relationships?
I imagine it's about building relationships that last, that can withstand the tests of time and change.
Exactly. It's about making a conscious effort to nurture our connections and make them sustainable over the long term.
Do you have any tips for building lasting relationships?
One effective approach is what we call the 90-day friendship builder. This is a structured approach to forming strong bonds that can last a lifetime.
I'm always a fan of structured approaches. Tell me more about this 90-day friendship builder.
It's a 3-phase process that guides you through the initial stages of building a friendship. The first phase, which lasts for about a month, focuses on shared activities. It's about finding common interests and spending quality time together doing things you both enjoy.
So going to concerts, trying new restaurants, volunteering together, things like that.
Exactly. The second phase, which also lasts for about a month, focuses on reciprocal vulnerability exchanges. This is where you start to open up to each other more, sharing personal stories, thoughts, and feelings.
It's about moving beyond those initial shared activities and building deeper emotional intimacy.
Yes, and the final phase, which lasts for the remaining month, focuses on collaborative projects. This could be anything from planning a trip together to starting a book club to working on a creative project together.
I love that. It's about taking that shared connection, channeling it into something productive and meaningful.
Precisely. And while this framework is called the 90-day friendship builder, the principles can be applied to any type of relationship you want to nurture.
It's about taking that intentional approach to building connections and making it a priority in our lives. We've talked about social microdosing, the 3D connection framework, and the 90-day friendship builder. It's clear that building meaningful connections takes effort. What are your thoughts on the role of technology in all of this?
Technology can be both a help and a hindrance when it comes to building relationships. On the one hand, it can connect us with people we might not otherwise meet and help us stay in touch with loved ones who live far away. But on the other hand, it can also lead to social isolation and a sense of disconnection if we're not careful.
That's an interesting perspective. It sounds like it's all about finding a balance and using technology in a way that enhances our connections rather than detracting from them.
Exactly. We need to be mindful of how we're using technology and make sure it's serving our needs rather than controlling us.
I think that's a great point to end on for now. We'll be back after a short break to discuss ways to maintain those connections and the role technology can play in fostering belonging. So we've been talking about the different types of loneliness and some, practical strategies for building meaningful connections. Now I'm curious to hear more about how we can maintain those connections and cultivate a lasting sense of belonging.
Yeah, that's an important question. Building connections is just the first step. The real work lies in nurturing those relationships and creating a sense of ongoing belonging.
So it's not enough to just make connections. We need to actively cultivate them and make them sustainable over time. What are some practical tips for doing that?
One powerful approach is to engage in activities that trigger the release of bonding hormones in our brains.
Oh, that sounds interesting. Tell me more about these brain-boosting activities.
One of the most effective activities is synchronized movement. Think dance classes, group fitness activities, even just walking together in sync. These activities have been shown to increase oxytocin, the bonding hormone, by up to 57%.
Wow, that's impressive. So moving together literally brings us closer. What other activities can boost those bonding hormones?
Collaborative creation is another fantastic way to bond. Things like working on a community garden, participating in a group art project, or even just cooking a meal together can release those feel-good hormones. When we create something together, we build a shared sense of accomplishment and connection.
I love that idea. It's about working together towards a common goal and sharing in the joy of creation.
Exactly. And if you're looking for something a little more adventurous, consider a survival simulation activity. Things like escape rooms or wilderness excursions can be incredibly effective for building trust and reliance. When we face challenges together and rely on each other for support, we form deep bonds.
Those sound like fun and memorable ways to strengthen connections. It's about stepping outside of our comfort zones and creating shared experiences that we can look back on and laugh about together.
Absolutely. Now, while it's essential to focus on those real-world connections, technology can also play a role in maintaining those bonds and fostering a sense of belonging.
You mentioned earlier that technology can be both a help and a hindrance when it comes to relationships. How can we use technology in a way that enhances our connections rather than detracting from them?
One important step is to be mindful of our digital habits. We need to make sure we're not letting technology consume our lives and prevent us from engaging in real-world interactions. It's about finding a healthy balance.
So it's about being intentional with our technology use, making sure it's serving our needs rather than controlling us.
Exactly. One practical strategy is to schedule regular digital detoxes. Even just taking a few hours each day to disconnect from our devices and engage in offline activities can make a big difference.
What are some things we can do during those digital detox periods to nurture our connections and foster belonging?
This is a great opportunity to engage in more meaningful forms of communication. Try writing handwritten letters or sending thoughtful cards. Studies have shown that receiving a handwritten note creates a deeper sense of connection than receiving a text or email.
I can see how that personal touch would make a big difference. It's about slowing down and taking the time to express ourselves in a more thoughtful and deliberate way.
Precisely, you could also use that time to connect with loved ones in person, have a meal together, go for a walk, or simply sit and chat. Those face-to-face interactions are so important for maintaining strong bonds.
It's about prioritizing those real-world connections and making time for the people who matter most.
Exactly. Now, while it's important to be mindful of our technology use and make sure it's not hindering our connections, technology can also be a valuable tool for enhancing our relationships and fostering belonging.
I'm curious to hear more about how technology can be used in a positive way to support our connections.
There are some fascinating advancements in what we call advanced connection technologies. One example is AI-assisted social coaching. There are apps that use artificial intelligence to provide conversation practice and real-time anxiety reduction prompts, helping users feel more comfortable and confident in social situations.
That sounds incredible. It's like having a virtual social coach in your pocket.
Exactly. And another exciting area is neurofeedback training. This involves using headbands that track brain activity to help users learn meditation and practice visualizing social scenarios. This can help people manage anxiety and build resilience in social situations.
It's amazing how technology can be used to support our mental and emotional well-being and help us feel more connected.
It is, and as technology continues to evolve, we can expect to see even more innovative tools and resources emerge to help us build and maintain strong relationships.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from understanding the different types of loneliness to exploring practical strategies for building and maintaining meaningful connections. As we wrap up our conversation, what's the key takeaway you want listeners to remember?
The most important thing to remember is that loneliness is not a permanent state. You have the power to change it. By taking proactive steps to nurture your emotional well-being, build meaningful connections, and engage in activities that foster belonging, you can create a rich and fulfilling life filled with love and connection.
That's a truly empowering message. It reminds us that we're not alone in this journey and that there are steps we can take to overcome loneliness and build the connections we crave.
Absolutely. And as connection scientist Dr. Marissa Franco so eloquently puts it, belonging grows through brave, consistent reaching out. The world needs exactly what only you can offer.
That's a beautiful quote and a powerful reminder that we all have something unique and valuable to contribute to the world, and that by reaching out and connecting with others, we not only enrich our own lives, but also make the world a brighter and more connected place.
Exactly. We all have the power to create a ripple effect of connection and belonging, starting with ourselves and extending outward to our families, communities, and beyond.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. I've learned so much from our conversation.
It's been my pleasure. I hope our discussion has inspired listeners to take action and start building those meaningful connections that we all need to thrive.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on Quick Speak. Remember, loneliness is a solvable problem. Start taking action today. Smile at a stranger, reach out to a friend, or join a new group or activity. You can find more tips and resources, including vocabulary and exercises from today's episode on our website. The link is in the description.
And don't forget to subscribe to Quick Speak for more tips on improving your English and connecting with the world around you.
We'll see you next time. Until then, keep practicing, keep connecting, and keep shining your unique light on the world.